Do you share this view that as of now, we may have a path back to something resembling pre-crisis levels of economic activity and employment?
Well, actually, I'm sorry to say that, yeah, I actually do share that optimism. I've
You don't
actually
have
been,
to apologize. No
probably
reason
something
to
I
be
ate.
sorry about that.
Probably, maybe I'm not feeling well or something. But no, I'm actually, for the next year or two, I'm actually quite optimistic. And I think, um, and I've been saying this since the spring, that once there's a vaccine, once the pandemic has passed, this is not like 2008 when we came out of the crisis with this huge overhang of household debt and excess overbuilding of housing and so on. This was this we were hit by this sudden blow from the virus, and once that headwind goes away, there's actually pent up demand. There's people have been saving a lot of money. So I'm actually quite optimistic about a really quite rapid economic recovery,
Hmm.
starting sometime in next year. Not that
Yeah.
doesn't That's not indefinite, but no, I think actually people are right to be optimistic.
Yeah, so there is certainly a lot of money right now in terms of household savings. With regards to the labor market, Paul, I am curious as to how the makeup of our economy today, meaning much more services oriented than maybe what it was in the last recession and certainly 20, 30 years ago, how that's going to play into the economic recovery.
Well, there is this question whether can we expect a Morning in America type recovery, 8% growth like we had coming out of the in some ways the pandemic slump looks more like the 79, 82 slump than it does like anything more recent. And part of the argument against that is, well, we're a service economy, not a manufacturing economy, and durable goods never fell off all that much, which I get. So maybe not 8%, but on the other hand, there's a lot of the unemployment has come out of service consumption that just fell off a cliff because people were correctly afraid and still are afraid to consume those services. And once people start going back to restaurants, once people start traveling, um, I don't see why that we can't have a lot of growth. Again, this is not to say that there aren't problems further down the pike, but there's really, I haven't seen a really good argument about why we can't have at least several quarters of quite rapid growth coming up.
What about the problems, not just further down the pike, but the problems right here, right now? We have
right.
talk of potentially a fiscal bridge, a much smaller one than perhaps the Democrats have been talking about. But is that still necessary then, if you still think that we'll have great growth going outside of the virus?
Yes, and first of all, it's the next few months are going to be extremely grim. I mean, we have this peculiar situation where out there, not too far away, is salvation, but in between is desolation and death. I mean, that's pretty much literally. And also, you want to, and that's economic as well as actual, literal death. And a lot of people are going to suffer gratuitously if we don't have a really good bridge across this. And anybody's guess, I'm not too optimistic about the politics. The one thing to say, and it's kind of cruel, where everybody talks about the K-shaped recovery, the people who are suffering most, and they're suffering enormously, and it's our obligation to help them, they also don't have a lot of money, don't have a lot of purchasing power, even in the best of times. So the people who are being really hurt, if you like, I'm optimistic about the economy, not quite so much about people. Looking forward. So, we really should be, above all, I mean, actually every effort should be redoubled, given that we know that there's an endpoint to this. There's no reason at all for people to be suffering economically. There's no reason at all for us to be having the kind of death tolls that we're having when there's a vaccine that's pretty much just around the corner.
So we don't really know if we're going to get that bridge, if we're going to get another stimulus to get us to the vaccine. But, going back this summer, there were a lot of fears about what would happen if the UI expansion was not renewed when it expired at the end of July. And you warned that it could be a very big hit without that. It never got expanded at all, and yet we didn't see the hit. In fact, consumption basically continued to rise uninterrupted. It's hard to see where that drop-off was in the charts. So have you updated some of your own views on the need for stimulus? And if so, what are sort of the broader lessons you take away from what you assessed back in August or the end of July about the need for that stimulus versus what you see now?
I still think we really needed it, and in some ways we needed it. It would be less urgent now if we had done it then. I mean, where we are now, as it turns out, that there were those UI checks. We sort of unintentionally had a very generous program, and sufficiently so that even a lot of lower income families managed to put money aside. So it turns out that they had built up reserves that they were able to draw on. And the other thing that we were really worried about was state and local cuts. And there'd been enough maneuvering by state and local governments to limit the scope of cuts so far. And maybe it's enough to get them through to where revenues start to recover with the economy. But I don't think it was wrong to be really worried. But we did learn that maybe low income, low wage workers who were so badly dependent and were laid off in such large numbers were more prudent, if you might say, that when they were receiving those UI payments than we had anticipated. So they were better prepared in a way for that political impasse than the politicians were.
And I know we talk a lot about this being a K-shaped recovery, but I'm curious, the fact that this recession, the pandemic didn't hit the upper class, the wealthier classes as hard as it did the lower income classes, is that what is also sort of feeding, I guess, the overall recovery, no matter what shape we want to call it?
Well, the fact of the matter is that people, it's the bulk of the purchasing power. If we weight people not by who they are, by their human rights, but weight them by their spending power. Most of the spending power was relatively unscathed through all of this, and so overall, a huge amount of devastation despite the CARES Act and all of that,
Right.
But for higher income people who, we're a very unequal country to start with, and the people who are on the winning side of that actually have been piling up money because of all the spending they haven't been doing. So that's where the prospects for a fast recovery come from.